more of you stayed than I thought. You want me to come in there? I'm glad you could stay today. As you noticed before she turned it off, we're going to talk about the life of Joseph. I'm scared it'll fall apart. Is that better? Okay. Before we get started, I'd like to offer a word of prayer. So if you'd pray with me, please. Our God and Father in heaven, thank you so much for this opportunity to speak here today. Thank you for giving us your word and give us the example of Joseph. Hopefully what I have prepared, I will be able to give it in a way that will be interesting, that everyone will be able to understand, and that we can learn from what Joseph teaches us from your word. Thank you again, Father, for all that you bless us with, and we pray these things in your Son's name. Amen. There is an old saying that I'm sure we all know. It says, "To err is human, and to forgive is divine." As one writer said, neither of these are Marine Corps policies. Supposedly, the Marine Corps are changing, and it's trying to become more like this. But regardless of if it's changing or not, forgiveness is something that we should all try to do. But unfortunately, in humanity, we don't see a lot of that sometimes, You look around you, you see drivers who are giving obscene signs to people who do things wrong when they're driving. They're not very forgiving. You see it in politics, unfortunately. You just see it all over the place. Also, as some of you have seen, there's a bumper sticker that says, "I don't get mad, I get even." Well, it's a funny bumper sticker. We laugh when we see it, but unfortunately, as I've said before, people tend to really take that as a policy. That's what they really think. I don't get mad, I get even. Y'all gonna have to excuse me. My eyesight is not what it used to be, number one. Number two, my short-term memory is not what it used to be either, so I refer to my notes a lot. As humans, we make mistakes. We sin, we do stupid things. Fortunately, we have a God who forgives. But unfortunately, it doesn't represent a policy that you see mostly in the world today. But there are always exceptions to the rule. And one of those exceptions is about a man whose character, regardless of how he was treated, and in spite of his unfair and erroneous accusations made against him, and even though he was rejected, abandoned, abused, maligned, and forgotten, he refused to become resentful or bear a grudge or succumb to bitterness. And that's who we're going to study about, is Joseph. A lot of times, people ask me, well, why do you like the Old Testament? And my answer to that is, I like the stories in it. I really do. I think it's a training manual for us. I think, if you look back in the New Testament, Paul's always referring to things that were learned in old days. Well, guess what? That was the Old Testament. That's what they learned. I just find it interesting when you read about these people. You look at David, and you look at Esther, and you look at Moses, and the things that they had to go through, and the lives that they lived. And yes, there were shortcomings, there were failings. Let's not even talk about what David did. He committed murder, adultery. But he learned from it, it seemed to me anyway. He moved on from it. He didn't let it define him. One writer says it's impossible to leave the truth in the theoretical realm when you see it revealed in the lives of real life men and women. This is what these divinely inspired biographies do. They distill truth and weave it into the fabric of everyday living. Let's turn over to Romans chapter 15 for a second. We're going to take a side trip here first before we get into this. Romans 15:4. For whatever was written in the past was written for our instruction, so that we may have hope through endurance and through the encouragement from the Scriptures. The earlier times that he's talking about is the Old Testament. It's the truths from there. And there's two basic reasons God has allowed us to have the Old Testament. You say that fast. To have the Old Testament available for study and application. One of these is for present instruction. And one of these is for future hope. God has given us that so that our minds can learn the truth about Him, about lives that we live. And He wants us to be encouraged so we can persevere. If you also read in 1 Corinthians 10, 6, and 11, I'm not going to do that right now, the same thing is pointed out. He talks about Israel and the things that they had to endure and experience. It's emphasizing that God has given us the Old Testament to instruct us, to give us hope, and to warn us how to live our lives today. Clarence McCartney made a statement that everyone's life has the makings of a novel, and perhaps no life is more like a suspenseful and compelling novel than Joseph's. He wrote, Joseph's story is a finely wrought and self-contained novella describing in vivid detail the development of his character from charismatic and arrogant youth to compassionate middle age. Genesis reaches a melodramatic peak in these climactic last chapters, a riches to rags to riches tale, complete with every human passion, love and hate, ambition and glory, jealousy and fury, tears of joy and grief are shed. Garments are rent in anguish. It's a gripping saga of treachery and deception, betrayal and forgiveness. Man, it sounds like something you could find on television, doesn't it? Or in a movie. You know, if you read the Bible, especially the Old Testament enough, you can find all these stories have everyday meanings and everyday real life stories in them. I mean, it's something that we face each and every day. You know, I think about, Moses. And I think about the things that he went through. Eventually, because of his sin, he will not go into the land of Canaan. And what does that teach us? That when we make mistakes, sometimes we have to face up to the consequences of those mistakes. And that's real life. That's what really happens in real life. That sometimes we have to face consequences of the things that we do. So, that is one of the reasons I really like this story about Joseph. It shows a lot of what real life is all about. So if you want to look at an overview of Joseph's life, if you look from Genesis 30, 34 to 37:2, you look at his birth to about 17 years of age. And if you read those scriptures, Joseph's life was in transition. His family was moving. There were a lot of things going on in that family. There was antagonism brewing in his family. There was clashes. There was all sorts of things that were going on. If you go on to the next segment of his life, which was 17 to 30 years in Genesis 37 through 41, Joseph is going to start reaching manhood. And then a lot of bad things start to happen to him, as we will get into, and as probably most of you remember. He's going to get sold into slavery. He's going to move into a land that he knows nothing about. He's going to be accused of things that he didn't do, and he's going to be imprisoned and forgotten. And then the last segment of his life is 30 years to his death in Genesis 41 through 50. And things change for him. he becomes more prosperous. But it was through God that he receives these blessings. And he receives opportunities to be blessed. And then he receives an opportunity to protect his family and then to show forgiveness to his brothers. But as my father used to say, sometimes to know where you are, you got to know where you've been. And so I think the best place to start is looking at his family. And the first person we come across is his father, Jacob. How many remember what his father's name means? I'm sorry? Also means something else. Deceiver. Yeah. And if you read enough about what happened with Jacob, you see that his life was just that. He deceived people. He deceived his brother Esau to get the blessing from his father. But he also had another name. I'm sorry? Israel. And do you know how he got that name and where he got that name and what that name means? Okay. Wrestled with the angel. Okay. What does the name mean? He clung to him. And he clung to him for a blessing. And if you look at it, the name Israel is a whole lot better than Jacob if you think about it, especially when you think about being clinging to God and his name deceiver. Let's start reading, as my grandson would say, back to the story. Side note here, William likes to hear stories, and he likes me to tell him stories. So when I do, we'll get off on a rabbit trail sometimes. He'll ask what something means, and I'll explain it to him, and then he'll say, back to the story. So that's what we're doing. Scott, will you read Genesis chapter 37, verses 1 through 3? 1
through 3?
Yeah.
Jacob lived in the land where his fathers had stayed, the land of Canaan. This is the account of Jacob's family line. Joseph, a young man of 17, was tending the flocks with his brothers, the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, and he brought about their father a bad report about them. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons, because he had been born to him in his old age, and he had made an ornate robe for him.
Okay, thank you. Who is Bilhah and Zilpah? Do y'all remember? Who is Bilhah and Zilpah? Okay. Why were Jacob's sons, why are they included in this? If you remember the story, Leah and Rachel, who were Jacob's wives, Israel's wives. Can you still hear me? Is that okay? Okay. They got into, how can I describe this politely, into a child-rearing contest. Leah starts having children, and Rachel has no children. And Rachel decides, well, if I can't give Jacob children, I'll give him my handmaiden so she can have children for him. So, I mean, we've got a convoluted set of circumstances here where you've got half-brothers, brothers, full brothers. It's a real mess once you really start looking at it. And we'll get to Rachel in just a minute. But Joseph comes about, and apparently Jacob is an older man now by the time Joseph comes around. And sometimes, I wouldn't know about this, but sometimes it seems that older men, when they have children in their older age, that it kind of changes them a little bit, makes them look at life differently. And I think that's what happened to Jacob here. I think he's got these sons, all these sons, and he has one daughter. And Joseph comes and he showers all of his attention on him. Now, how would you feel if you were a brother or a half-brother and you saw this happening? I'm sorry? Resentful, jealous, envious. I mean, it's kind of hard when your father's giving one of your brothers something that's really nice. And we'll talk about that coat in just a minute. Jacob, when he gives Joseph this coat, is basically saying, guess what? I love you more than these guys. I think you're the favored son, so to speak. But it's interesting that all this comes about. Joseph, well, let me back up. Joseph is Rachel's son. And who is how do we look at Rachel and Leah as compared to the children from Leah as opposed to Rachel? If you look at it, we know that, especially in the story of how Jacob marries Rachel, Jacob was deceived. Do you remember the story? He worked 7 years for Laban, the father of Leah and Rachel, and he's supposed to marry Rachel. But what happens? Doesn't work out that way. Instead, he ends up with Leah. Now, how that happens, I still haven't quite figured it out. I don't know if there was a big party and Jacob got drunk or something. I don't know. I'm not sure what exactly happened. But they go to bed and he goes, whoops, this isn't my wife. Excuse me. I work for the other one, the one that I really love. Well, Laban gives them an explanation that the younger doesn't get married before the older. I mean, I've heard of that before, but anyway, back in those days. So he's got to work another 7 years for Rachel. So guess what? He does, and he gets Rachel. And guess what? She doesn't have any kids, but Leah does. Again, that's another story. I'm not quite sure about either why that's all going on. Anyway, what happens next is Jacob decides he wants to go home to Canaan. He wants to see his father. And in so doing, there's another deceitful episode that goes on. And I don't want to get into the particulars of it, but eventually Jacob gets to go home, and he gets to go home with everything that he owns. And when he does, there are several things that happen along the way. There are certain tragedies that occurred. Let's turn over to Genesis chapter 34. Verses, Scott, 1 and 2.
Now Dinah, the daughter Leah had borne to Jacob, went out to visit the woman of the land. When Shechem, son of Hamor, the Hivite, the ruler of that area, saw her, he took her and raped her.
Not a very, how can I put it? Not something that any father would want to see happen to a daughter of theirs. But she was raped. And what happens next? Scott, you want to read the next few verses for us? Go ahead and read it from verse 3 on down to verse 7.
His heart was drawn to Dinah, daughter of Jacob. He loved the young woman and spoke tenderly to her. And Shechem said to his father Hamor, "Get me this girl as my wife." When Jacob heard that his daughter Dinah had been defiled, his sons were in the fields with his livestock. So he did nothing about it until they came home. Then Shechem's father Hamor went out to walk with Jacob. Meanwhile, Jacob's sons had come in from the fields, and as soon as they heard what had happened, they were shocked and furious because Shechem had done an outrageous thing in Israel by sleeping with Jacob's daughter, a thing that should not be done.
Does anything stick out to you about this incident? The lack of something, anyway? Jacob didn't say anything. Listen, I don't have any kids. I've never had kids. Okay? All I can tell you is, if that had been my daughter, I'd have been storming out the door looking for him. I mean, he didn't say anything. He didn't do anything. I've always thought that was strange. But I think it's a pattern for Jacob, if you really want to know the truth. If you look at, and we'll talk about a few more things that happened along the way. Jacob's sons are the ones who decide they're going to do something. And boy, did they do it. They devised a plan whereby they could just slaughter all the men that were there. I'm not going to read everything in there, what happened, but they slaughtered them all. They slaughtered all the men. And then what did they do? They took the children, they took the wives, they took the cattle, they took all the livestock, and they said, "You're ours now." What happened here is bad. Yes, it was bad, but I find it interesting that Jacob didn't do anything. It's apparently, I would think that the writer would write down something that Jacob would have said. The only thing he did say is, let's turn over. Scott, you want to read verses 30 through the end of the chapter.
34?
30 through, and 34, correct.
Then Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, "You have brought trouble on me by making me obnoxious to the Canaanites and the Perizzites, the people living in this land. We are few in number, and if they join forces against me and attack me, I and my household will be destroyed." But they replied, "Should he have treated our sister like a prostitute?"
Jacob doesn't say, "Yeah, they shouldn't have done that to her." He didn't say anything about that. What's he worried about? His reputation. I just find it interesting of his passivity towards what has happened there. He doesn't act. He doesn't really say anything about it. He doesn't do anything about it. Instead, it's his sons who react, and he seems to have no control over them. Unfortunately for Jacob, there's going to be more tragedy, unfortunately, as they travel back to Canaan. The second tragedy is going to be occurring with Rachel, his wife, his beloved wife. And what happens is she's in childbirth, and she gives birth to a son. His name is Benjamin. Well, that's what Jacob calls him. And then she dies in childbirth. You know, that had to be a very hard thing for Jacob, because this is the woman that he loved, that he truly loved, his wife Rachel. And now she's gone. And he's almost home, and he doesn't have his full family with him. But there's one other thing that happens here along the way, and it's in chapter 35. This is taken right after Rachel has died. It starts in verse 21 and goes through 22. Scott?
Israel moved on again and pitched his tent beyond Migdal Eder. While Israel was living in that region, Reuben went in and slept with his father's concubine Bilhah, and Israel heard of it.
It gets better. Now one of his sons, his oldest son at that, decides he's going to sleep with one of his brother's mothers. It may have been a half-brother, but still, one of his brother's mother. Now, there is significance in this for why it happened. Reuben is the firstborn. He is the one that, quote, is supposed to receive the extra blessing as the oldest child. There are some people and some writers, and I think I agree with them, that Reuben is kind of making his move to establish his, quote, dominance, that he's in charge. And so by doing, he sleeps with his father's wife or father's handmaid or whatever you want to call her. Well, anyway. Point being is, if you read in the next verses, the writer of this book doesn't say anything about it. He didn't say that Jacob said anything about it. That Jacob was like, "You idiot, what are you doing?" Instead, what happens is the writer lists the sons of Jacob. It's not going to be until Genesis chapter 49, if you'll turn over there real quick, that Jacob finally says something about it. Verses 3 and 4.
Reuben, you are my firstborn, my mighty, the first sign of my strength, excelling in honor, excelling in power. Turbulent as the waters, you will no longer excel, for you went up unto my father's bed, onto my couch, and defiled it.
This is a poetic way of saying to Reuben, you're wild and restless, but you no longer excel in honor and power as the firstborn son. I find it interesting that it isn't until his deathbed that Jacob says anything about this. Again, another example of his passivity. So now you have the background of what Joseph grew up in. It's not a happy family, as you can tell. There's a lot of, I think, power mongering. There's a lot of deceitfulness, a lot of envy. But then you have Joseph who comes along, and as I said before, it appears, well, it doesn't just appear, he's Jacob's favorite son. I mean, you look at it. If you've got 11 unruly brothers and unruly sons, who are you going to favor? The one that doesn't give you as much trouble. That's who it's going to be. But as we're going to start reading here, back to the story, as William would say, Joseph's brothers are no fools. They know what's going on here. They see who the favorite son is. So let's go back to Genesis chapter 37. Verse 3 said, Now Israel loved Joseph more than his other sons, because Joseph was the son born to him in his old age, and he made a robe of many colors for him. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his other brothers, they hated him and could not bring themselves to speak peacefully to him or kind to him. Do you see what's going on? We got envy, we got hatred, we got brothers who are just about had enough of this favoritism to Joseph. But guess what? It's going to get worse. Scott, you want to read verses 5 through 11, please?
Joseph had a dream. And when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. He said to them, "Listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field when suddenly my sheaf arose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine, bound down to it." His brothers said to him, "Do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us?" And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said. Then he had another dream, and he told it to his brothers. "Listen," he said, "I had another dream, and this time the sun and the moon and the 11 stars were bowing down to me." When he told his father as well as his brothers, his father rebuked him and said, "What is this dream you had? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you?" His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind.
Joseph says, "Hey, I got a dream for you. I want to tell you something." And they're like, "What? Okay, go ahead." "Oh, you guys are going to bow down to me." I mean, if it was me, I guess I'd be kind of had the same response they did. "You think you're going to be our ruler? Come on, guy." And then he gives them, it's not just one dream, it's 2 dreams. I mean, look at the situation that's going on here, folks. He's telling them, "I'm going to be in charge of you. I'm going to rule over you." And they've already know who the favorite son is. I mean, the powder keg has now been lit. The fuse is burning, and whatever happens next is not going to be a pretty sight. I want to go back just for a second. It's an interesting thing about this robe that Jacob gives Joseph. Generally speaking, in those days, if you had a tunic or something like that, it's usually either short sleeve or cut off. And the reason for that is it's easier to work in. Well, from what I've read anyway, it appears that this was something that was more elegant than that. And basically what Jacob's telling Joseph is, you're better than these guys. You don't have to do what they do. Just keep that in mind as we get to the end here. Scott, you want to read 37:12 through 14?
Now his brothers had gone to graze their father's flocks near Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, "As you know, your brothers are grazing your flocks near Shechem. Come, I'm going to send you to them." "Very well," he replied. So he said to them, "Go and see if all is well with your brothers and with the flocks, and bring word back to me." Then he sent him off to the valley of Hebron. When Joseph arrived at Shechem, a man found him wandering around in the fields. You're good?
Yeah. Do you notice something where they went to? The brothers with the flocks? Shechem. And why is that significant? That's right. That's the guy they killed. That is interesting that they would go back to the same place that they just murdered a bunch of people. Well, that's true. It's safe. There's no guys there. But maybe that's the reason why Jacob sends Joseph. Make sure that everything is still okay, that, they haven't gotten into trouble. Because we know that they don't get into trouble, do they? Go ahead, Scott. Read 15 on down to verse 20.
When Joseph arrived at Shechem, a man found him wandering around in the fields and asked him, "What are you looking for?" He replied, "I'm looking for my brothers. Can you tell me where they are grazing their flocks?" "They have moved on from here," the man answered. "I heard them say, 'Let's go to Dothan.'" So Joseph went after his brothers and found them near Dothan. But they saw him in the distance, and before he reached them, they plotted to kill him. "Here comes the dreamer," they said to each other. "Come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of the cisterns and say that a ferocious animal devoured him. Then we'll see what comes of his dreams."
Boy, you talk about hostility. I mean, they hate him so much, they want to kill him. Look, here comes the guy that has all those dreams. Yeah, we'll show him what those dreams are going to amount to. We'll kill him. I don't know about you. My brother and I have a brother and two sisters. Growing up, we had disagreements, but I never wanted to kill them. I may have been mad at them a lot of times. I'm sure those of you who've had brothers and sisters, you may have gotten mad at them too. And, but I don't think I ever wanted to kill any of them. Like I said, they made me mad, and I'm sure I made them mad a lot of times too, but never to that extent. Reading on, I find this part interesting in 21 and 22. When Reuben heard this, he tried to save him from them. He said, "Let's not take his life." Reuben also said to them, "Don't shed blood. Throw him into this pit in the wilderness, but don't lay a hand on him." He was intending to rescue him from their hands and return him to his father. This is the same Reuben who slept with his stepmother, or whatever you want to call her. I don't know why he said this. I don't know why he did it. He doesn't say. Maybe he felt guilty for what he did. I don't know. It may be that he thought that Joseph just needed a lesson to be learned. That, okay, let's throw him into the pit. He'll learn something from this, that maybe he isn't as high and mighty as he thinks he is. But what happens after this? Scott, you want to read on from 23 down to 28, please?
So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the ornate robe he was wearing, and they took him and threw him into the cistern. The cistern was empty. There was no water in it. And they sat down to eat their meal. They looked up and saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. Their camels were loaded with spices, balm, and myrrh, and they were on their way to take them down to Egypt. Judah said to his brothers, "What will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood." His brothers agreed. So when the Midianite merchants came by, his brothers pulled Joseph up out of the cistern and sold him for 20 shekels of silver to the Ishmaelites, who took him to Egypt.
Okay. Notice the first thing they got rid of? The coat. The symbol of everything that they hated about him. It was like stripping off a fur coat and saying, you're just no better than we are, and here it goes. I'm going to tear it up for you. I mean, if there was anything that happened in this that showed how much they hated him and how much they despised him, I think taking that coat off was the first thing that should have got you down to it. Notice what else they did. They sat down and ate lunch. They didn't even care. They just threw him in the pit. So what? We're hungry. And then something that really, I would hope would bother all of us, is they said, you know what? Let's not kill him. Let's make some money off of this kid. Says he's been a thorn in our side. We can make some money off of this. Let's sell him into slavery. Let's get rid of him. Now we don't have to listen to his dreams anymore. And that's what they did. And then they're going to take the coat back to their father Jacob. And they're going to say, "Is this your son's coat?" Knowing good and well that it was their brother's coat. And notice that they don't say what happened to him. They let Jacob come to his own conclusion after they dipped it in the goat's blood and show it to him. And he goes, he must have been eaten by a ferocious animal. I don't know. Woe is me. I can't believe this is happening. And they don't say a word. Well, of course, how could they say a word? They just sold their brother into slavery. I think there's some lessons we can learn from this. No enemy is more subtle than passivity. When parents are passive, they may eventually discipline, but mostly the delayed reaction may be carried out in anger. Passivity not only blinds us to the here and now, it makes us inconsistent. And as Christians, if we don't begin to wake up and take control of the situation through the power of Jesus Christ, who will? You may say, well, I'm a grandparent now, and my child-rearing days are over. Or I'm single, what can I do about it? Well, these statements, in my opinion, are convenient excuses. We are all born into families. We all live in families of one kind or another, and we all interact with the families every day. In case you haven't noticed lately, the family is on a slippery slope and scarcely resembles the families of even 25 or 50 years ago. We claim here that we're a family. You know what? It's our responsibility to look after one another. That's why we're a family. That's why we're a community. You know, Alex, I thought, did a great lesson today. We need to look out for each other. And we need to understand that was why God brought us together as a family. Second lesson is no response is more cruel than jealousy. The Song of Solomon in chapter 8, verse 6 says, jealousy is as cruel as the grave. We have to deal with attitudes as surely as we deal with actions. You know, you look at Joseph's early life, it's filled with jealousy and infighting, and sin and mistreatment crept in and was tolerated. So what is the answer? Well, I think one of the first answers is prayer. You know, we talk about it a lot. We talk about, oh, I'm going to pray for you. Well, that's great. Maybe sometimes we should just stop and say, I'm going to pray for you, and then pray for them. Not wait. I mean, I've been guilty of that as well. But I remember one time I was visiting a client in the hospital, and it was not major surgery. It was Phil, he had gallstones removed, you know, and as you know, that's pretty painful. And I said, do you mind if I pray for you? And he said, yeah. And he said, that would be great. And I think he thought I was going to just walk away, but I said, no, let's do it right here. And I did it, and I think he really appreciated that. You know, I look at Jacob, and I wonder, if you look at everything that happened to him, especially after this episode with Joseph and with Rachel, what happened to her, if he just didn't pray to God, I mean, who else is he going to talk to after a while? The only person that can do anything about it, really, if you think about it, is God. Let us remember that God cares, that God loves us. God is willing and wants to hear from us. You know, I know we have a prayer chain, and we've been praying for a lot of people. For those who remember, Rachel, her name used to be Alvarez. I think it's Delgado now. She had a baby. Rebecca, thank you. Rebecca Alvarez. And it's now Rebecca Delgado, if I'm correct. Yeah. She had a baby, and all of a sudden she went into liver and kidney failure. And the word got out. There were people who were just willing and able to pray for her. And I know we're still praying for her. We're praying for Terry. There's so many others that we pray for. But I think what I love about that prayer text is that we let people know that we are praying for them. And there's just so many others. I think part of the idea of prayer is letting people know that you're praying for them. Any thoughts or comments? That's all I got for today. Okay. Go ahead.
It's interesting. They saw him through their grandfather's half
Yeah.
God said would be a source of a thorn in their side. And sure enough, they play a part in this whole deceptive plan.
Yeah, they sure did. They sure did. So continue reading on in chapters 30, starting in chapter 39. We're going to skip 38 and read chapter 39. And we'll get into that next week. Let's close with a prayer. Our Father in heaven, thank you so much for your word. We thank you so much for the story of Joseph. We thank you for letting us look at the good things and the bad things. Help us to learn from this. You've given us these lessons to learn so that we can apply them in our lives, and we pray that we do that. We love you and we thank you in all things, Father, and we praise you in your Son's holy and precious name.